Hello and welcome back. In this lecture we are going to create another Azure function under the same function app, and this time we are going to trigger the function using storage queue trigger, which means we'll have a storage queue created and then a user or application can pass a message to the storage queue, and as soon as the message lands in storage queue it will trigger a Azure function, and the message will be passed to Azure function as part of the binding, the input binding. We're just going to take that function and save it to our Cosmos DB collection. Now before creating the Azure function, we need to create a storage queue and a Cosmos DB collection. So let's go ahead and create these. So under our Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer, I'm logged in into my subscription, and under the subscription I have my TGG storage account. Here we are going to create a new queue under the queues option. So just click on create queue. I'm going to name it TGG queue and press enter. That's it. Your new queue is created. Similarly, let's go to our Azure portal and create a Cosmos DB collection. So in our Azure portal, inside our TGG Cosmos DB account, and we already created a TGG database, just click on the drop down option here and click on new container. So I'm going to use my existing TGG database, and under this database let's create a TGG collection. I'm going to keep the partition key as /id and going to reduce my container throughput to manual and 400 read units per second. That's it. Just click on OK, and this should create a new collection called TGG collection for you. So a new collection is created. Right now it's empty. Once we add items here, we will be able to see it here and also be able to run SQL query on our new collection. Now let's go ahead and create our new storage queue triggered Azure function. So now I'm back to my bash shell under my function app account. Now to create a storage queue triggered Azure function, we need to use a different template. So while creating the HTTP trigger template, if you remember, we used HTTP trigger template name. To listen all the templates available to us, you can use the command function templates list, and then you will see all the different templates available for each programming language. We are interested in JavaScript. So here you can see we have HTTP trigger, we have Azure Cosmos DB trigger, blob storage trigger, and many other different templates. We are interested in Azure queue storage trigger template. I'm just going to copy it. Just clear my screen. So this time we are going to run the same function new command, but this time I'm going to name my function storage queue trigger function, and I'm going to pass the template name as Azure queue storage trigger. Let's run it. And just like before, we have a new function folder created with its own function.json file and a sample index.js file. Let's open it in Visual Studio Code. So here we have a new folder with its own function.json file. Again, we have a bindings array. So we have an input binding with direction as in. Now we need to map it to TGG queue. We want this function to be triggered whenever there's a new message coming into TGG queue. And here in connection, so our function needs to connect to the storage account, and if you remember, we added the connection string to our storage account in our local setting.json. So the environment variable is Azure Web Job Storage. We are going to provide that here. So through this binding, your function will be able to connect to your queue using the Azure Web Job Storage Environment Variable connection string. The type of input binding is queue trigger, and you can give a name to your binding as well. Now inside our index.js file, we have a simple one-line code that takes in the queue message item as input parameter through input binding and prints it out. Now to test it in our local environment, all you need to do is run function start, and this time both of the functions, the HTTP trigger and queue trigger function, should get started. Now there is no URL for the queue trigger function because it triggers whenever there is a new queue item landing in our storage queue. Now let's trigger this function. So I'm back to my Microsoft Storage Explorer. From this Explorer, you can select TGT queue and add a new message to this queue. I'm going to add name and again encode. By default, all the messages that gets added to the queue are base64 encoded, but if you do not want to encode the messages, you can select UTF-8. I'm going to keep it as base64 encoded. You can also select the time to live, for how long you want the message to stay in queue. So let's say if the function is not up, your function app is down, so you can keep on collecting messages in your queue, and you can set an expiry value. If you do not want messages to expire at all, you can select none here. I'm going to keep default expiry date here. So a message is added, but if I refresh it, it should go away because our function should have triggered and the message should have been processed and gone from here. So a message is gone. Let's go back to our bash shell. So you can see our storage queue trigger function ran. The reason was a new message landed in TGT queue. The message was processed and we have the output here. And then you will also get the details about how long the function ran and it was a success or a failure. So we have our basic storage queue function running. In the next lecture, we are going to add a Cosmos DB collection output binding and store the queue message that we are getting in input binding into the collection. Thank you.